Welcome back to Click Revisions and Inspector Calls season. Now we've looked at each of the characters, in this video we'll begin to focus on the themes of the play and examine how J.B. Priestley brought all of his ideas together. This video is about class in the play. But put in a clearer way, it's all about the ways society separates people into different groups, such as rich and poor, professional or unskilled, desirable and undesirable. How those different groups view and treat one another is very important to the overall message of an Inspector Calls, and a lot of the drama and the story in the play come about as a direct result of these social differences. So we're going to look at the class backgrounds of each of the characters and examine how social class plays into the decisions and motivations of each person and ultimately leads to the death of Eva Smith. If this sounds really complicated, then don't worry. The good news is there is a huge amount of evidence throughout the text that you can use to show understanding in your English literature exam. In fact, because Priestley's characters are so defined by their class and social standing, nearly everything in the play can be linked back to the theme of class, which makes your job much easier. We'd also recommend you watch the video on context at the start of this season for more background on social class if you haven't done so already. So, let's start with a question. Why is the class background of each character so important to an Inspector Calls? Why do we bother to make such a big deal of it when studying this play? Well, learning about an Inspector Calls focuses so heavily on class because J.B. Priestley wrote this play for a reason beyond just telling an interesting story about a dead woman and the people who knew her. And as we look deeper into the play, it should become clear that absolutely every aspect of it, from the Burling family dinner to the inspector's investigation right through to the last years of Eva Smith's life, are all deeply rooted in the class of the characters and the divide between classes that exists in society. In order to achieve the grade that you deserve in your English literature exam, it's highly likely you will need to show some understanding of how the actions and motivations of every character are driven by their class in some way. So, open the play, stick a pin in it, and you're going to find something to say about class. In the first few stage directions, we're given lots of set details, and all of them suggest an expensive property. The Burling's house is a fairly large suburban house belonging to a prosperous manufacturer. It features good, solid furniture. Overall, the house is substantial and heavily comfortable, but not cosy and homelike. With stage directions like these, it's easy for anyone rehearsing a performance of Inspector Calls to imagine the sort of house J.B. Priestley was thinking of when he wrote the play. It's opulent, it's expensive, and a little more like a museum than a family home. This is a house where people live by a strict set of rules, where you're not supposed to compliment the chef in front of the dinner guests, and where the women leave the room after dinner so that the men can carry on being men. When the play opens, we, the audience, arrive at the Burling house just as they're finishing their celebratory meal, and nearly every detail on show is designed to tell the audience that the Burlings are a wealthy family. All the Burlings are dressed in formal clothes, with the men in dinner jackets and white ties, even though they're dining at home. They're drinking port, which they serve from a decanter and not from a bottle, and they're smoking cigars. And they also have a servant who's tidying up the dessert plates and waiting on the family as they enjoy their evening. Edna is a parlourmaid, which is like a butler and a housekeeper all rolled into one. She doesn't feature very much in the play, we didn't even give her her own video, but she's still an important character, because just by being there she instantly shows the audience that the Burling family are from somewhere near the top of the social class ladder. Of course, if we look at that ladder, with upper class at the top and working class all the way down at the bottom, we can confidently place Edna somewhere down near the bottom. She is, after all, literally clearing up the Burling's dirty dishes as the play opens. The only other character in the play who lives down near the bottom of the class ladder is, of course, Eva Smith, and we don't ever actually get to meet her. However, we know, not just from Inspector Gould's account, but from each of the Burlings, that Eva Smith was poor and struggled to provide for herself after losing her job, which itself was manual factory work with poor pay and working conditions. These details place her firmly in the working class bracket. But what about each of the Burling family? Well, Arthur Burling is the prosperous manufacturer mentioned at the start of the play, but he's also described as provincial in speech, which means he has a regional accent. He doesn't sound posh. He's a self-made man, which means he hasn't always been rich and may not have a full education, but he's certainly not a man who struggles with paying the bills, so we can safely place Mr. Burling at the top of the middle-class bracket. Meanwhile, Mrs. Burling is described in the stage directions as her husband's social superior, meaning he married someone from a higher class bracket than him. He was punching above his weight. We can place her in the upper class bracket. And as Sheila and Eric have been born into the family's wealth, we can place them there with her somewhere between both parents. Gerald is also very well off, and was born into money like Sheila and Eric. In fact, Gerald is probably the most high-class character in the play. His parents aren't at the dinner because they're on a holiday overseas, which was very much a high-class thing to do in 1912 when you had to take a boat to get anywhere. Even more important is the fact that Gerald's parents own a bigger factory than Arthur Burling, and it's suggested that Gerald's mother hasn't always approved of Gerald getting together with a girl from a lower class bracket than their family. Mr. Burling tells him, "I have an idea your mother feels you might have done better for yourself, socially," which tells us that Mrs. Croft is even more snobbish than Mrs. Burling is, and expected her son to marry someone just as important and well-bred as them. So, looking at our class ladder or hierarchy, we have a couple of characters at the bottom of the ladder in the working classes, and everyone else is at the top end of the spectrum. The only character left to place is Inspector Gould, and he sits firmly in the middle of the group. As a police officer, he is not wealthy or poor. He has a skilled, professional job which rewards hard work and expertise with promotion through the ranks of the police force, and he has risen to a mid-level rank as an inspector. He's firmly middle class, and acts as a kind of go-between between the rich characters and the ghost of Eva Smith. So that's the background of each of the characters. Let's take a look at how they act on them throughout the play. As we've seen in previous videos, climbing the social ladder is very important to Mr. Burling. As he mentions in his rambling toast, he used to be mayor before the play was set, and is expecting to receive a knighthood from the Queen in the future, so no wonder he's treating Gerald like one of the family. For Burling, reputation is everything, and protecting and strengthening his reputation goes hand in hand with protecting and strengthening his business in order to make more money and become more powerful in society, and so it goes on. Mr. Burling is first and foremost a man of business and a public man, as he puts it, but he hasn't gotten where he is in life by taking other people into consideration. As a boss, his opinion is that workers should just do their job and accept anything offered to them, or go and work somewhere else. As he says himself, "We were paying the usual rates, and if they didn't like those rates, they could go and work somewhere else. It's a free country," I told them. His attitude towards workers' rights seems pretty terrible by today's standards, but it was fairly normal for British industry in 1912, which is why so many workers went on strike in the early part of the 20th century. In the play, Burling predicts that factory owners will come together to put their collective foot down and stop the pesky labour trouble that resulted in Eva Smith losing her job. "We employers are at last coming together to see that our interests and the interests of capital are properly protected, and we're in for a time of steadily increasing prosperity." When he says we're in for a time of steadily increasing prosperity here, he doesn't mean everyone. He means that we employers at the start of the first sentence. It will be a good time for people who own factories, which means it will continue to be a lovely time for the Burlings and the Crofts of this world, but a fairly rubbish time for all the people who work for him. This is obviously important, because Burling's priorities are to protect his own interests and always make more money. Lower costs and higher prices, as he puts it. And this attitude is the brick wall that Eva Smith runs into head first by going on strike from her job and trying to represent her co-workers and negotiate with Mr. Burling. He calls Eva Smith a troublemaker, but he's so out of touch with his fellow humans that he doesn't even consider the troubles of Eva Smith and those like her before he starts firing the workforce. In his eyes, he's just getting rid of a problem. In fact, the attitude of the upper classes towards those they consider beneath them in an inspector calls is in many cases downright snooty and shows an open prejudice against working class lifestyles. The rich people in this play sometimes appear almost disgusted by the poor. Gerald's comment that the factory workers would be all broke if I know them after the holidays makes it clear that he has a them and us mentality towards the poor, and more importantly, the people who work in the factory that pays for his lifestyle. There's an assumption here that just because someone is born into a lower class, they couldn't possibly afford to manage their money responsibly. Which we also know not to be true, as he says himself that Eva Smith lived very economically on what he'd allowed her. Mrs. Burling makes much the same sort of generalisation when she suggests girls of that class as an explanation for Eva Smith's suicide, and later claims that Eva Smith was claiming elaborate fine feelings and scruples that were simply absurd in a girl in her position when she stopped taking money from Eric. As if a working class girl would ever refuse money just because it's stolen, she's saying. The irony here is that as much as they judge the lower classes as lesser people, the Burlings are not good people themselves. In the eyes of J.B. Priestley, this is a sin of the rich and selfish, the corruption at the heart of the play. This idea that there are two sets of rules in society, one for the poor, where you follow orders and do as you're told, however horrible life becomes, and one for the rich, where you do whatever you want. The upper and lower classes really do exist in two different worlds in this play, and the upstanding reputation of the upper class protects them from suspicion or accusation. Take Mr. Burling, for example. At the start of the play, the idea of social shame or going to court for anything is so ridiculous that he makes jokes to Gerald about it. And he and his wife repeatedly try to use their social standing as some sort of get-out-of-jail-free card when the inspector arrives, as if their social status should be the only question that the inspector needs to ask before leaving them alone. This sense of corruption is evident everywhere in the play, where a character misuses an opportunity their background offers them for their own gain at the expense of someone else. Burling firing Eva Smith to stop wages going up by 12%. Mrs. Burling sitting on a charity panel but turning Eva Smith away because of a personal prejudice. Sheila threatening to take Mummy and Daddy's money to a different shop. Eric threatening to make a scene when Eva Smith won't let him into her house. And Gerald squirreling her away in his friend's house and leaving her some money whenever he drops in, rather like you might treat a prostitute. All of these actions benefit the Burlings, but together result in the ruin of Eva Smith. And they're all abuses of class privilege. Of course, you could argue that we're being harsh on Gerald here, and that he at least offered Eva Smith some happiness, however misguided he was. And yes, Gerald did make Eva Smith happier than she'd ever been before, for a short period of time. But let's look at Gerald again. He's the most upper-class character in the play, and his mother objected to him marrying Sheila. He clearly had no future with Eva Smith, and he would have been very aware of the social naughtiness of his actions. So by making her happy, you could argue he was only setting her up to fall even harder once he'd moved on and left her poor and without support again. As J.B. Priestley saw it, this corruption in the upper classes stretched everywhere. And you can see it in the play in the fleeting glimpses we're given of the world outside the Burling house. Think about Alderman Meggerty, the character who Gerald saves Eva Smith from when they meet, and how he's described. He's half-drunk and goggle-eyed, and has Eva Smith wedged into a corner with that obscene fat carcass of his. It's not a pleasant image. And this is an alderman, a type of court judge, who lives a respectable life by day, and by night he gets drunk in bars and sexually assaults young working-class girls who don't have the power to do anything about it. He's a notorious womanizer as well as being one of the worst sots and rogues in Brumley. And what's even worse is that everyone in town already knows about it, but he's protected by his position and the thin veneer of respectability it offers him. Think about how Eva Smith is meant to represent every working-class person out there, and it's almost a perfect metaphor for the relationship between the rich and the poor in an Inspector Calls. And as Alderman is exactly the same position that Mr. Burling holds, that's got to be a deliberate decision on the part of J.B. Priestley. After all, as the inspector says, public men Mr. Burling have responsibilities as well as privileges. And this is very much the message Priestley wanted his audience to take away, even if Mr. Burling is too busy covering up Eric's crimes to listen to it. Thanks for watching. That's all on social class for now, but don't think because we haven't mentioned something relating to the class of the characters that it isn't worth bringing up in your exam. There really is an endless amount to write on the subject in relation to this play. Our next video will focus on the role of women in the play, but we'd recommend you attempt to write a few sentences in answer to each of these questions before you move on. Question 1. What class would you place each character in? Write a sentence to justify your choices for each character and try to rank them in order from upper class to working class. Question 2. What impression of the Burling family are given by their opening stage directions and descriptions? How does this affect the audience's reaction to their behaviour later in the play? Question 3. How important is it that the inspector is middle class and not the Burling's social equal?